everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. Hope you're all doing very well today. In this video, I want to tell you about the 1967 American Card Catalog and its publication, its printing, and what happened afterwards and who actually printed this thing, because this is actually a really interesting part of hobby history. I've had this one for quite a long time. It didn't cost me a lot of money, actually. 50 bucks, I think. Well, that could be a lot of money for a really out-of-date publication, but I'm looking at it through a lens of hobby history here. So what actually makes this kind of interesting is that this is the first publication that wasn't printed by Jefferson Burdick, who had passed away, I believe, in March of 1963. And unlike today, where we have a lot of price guides that are printed yearly or monthly, the American card catalogs were really only printed only a couple of years, between 1939 to 1960. And again, Burdick had passed away in March of 1963, where Woody Gelman ended up picking up the slack, or the mantle, if you will. Those are some pretty big shoes to fill, trying to replace Jefferson Burdick. But I think he did a really pretty good job. Of course, even Jefferson Burdick couldn't handle publishing a catalog like this by his lonesome. So he had a bunch of his friends help him, and one of the guys, one of his editors, was Woody Gelman. Now, when Woody Gelman started to publish his 1967 catalog, it was started a year prior, trying to get everything together. So one of the editors on this particular publication was Rich Egan, and he's a really interesting hobby pioneer. And it's kind of interesting here where you see a transition of our hobby pioneers between Jefferson Burdick in 1935-36, and at that time in the 1930s, he was just looking for other collectors to help him with his study of sports cards. And by the late 1950s, Burdick was he was retired by 1959, and in 1960 he starts the American Card Catalog, very kind of like for the very last time. But there's an interesting thing that if you see the 1960 American Card Catalog, he leaves up a lot of the baseball issues to Buck Barker and Lionel Carter, because Burdick really doesn't know a whole lot about baseball. He's more into other things, so he leaves it to these two guys. And by 1967, Gelman is kind of, I guess, leaving up certain portions of this particular catalog to other collectors. Now, if you do actually ever see the 1960 American Card Catalog, which I would love to add to my collection, the R section of these catalogs is for quote-unquote recent, and it was actually just kind of like redesigned, and that was left up mostly to Buck Barker, and he again does a really interesting job here. So this is actually a really extensive book. I don't particularly like this thing. It's really kind of hard to read, to tell you the truth. And if you're a novice collector or just getting into the hobby and you actually come across one of these, you may be a little bit confused. And I don't blame you at all, because when I first saw one of these things, I was like, well, what is going on here? This is actually a really neat piece of hobby history, and I wanted to explore it today. And Rich Egan. And so you're probably thinking, oh, who is Rich Egan, and why does this matter? If you don't look at history, you're doomed to repeat it. As Raul from AI Edge Sports always says, history never repeats, but it does rhyme. And we see this time and time again in the hobby. And because I've been in the hobby for such a long time, I've seen it kind of like a cat go in circles. And it doesn't seem like we kind of learn our lessons. And so it's one of the reasons why I do this, actually. because I'm really fascinated as to how we actually got here, and if we kind of like take a peek at what was going on in the past, maybe we can avert some very bad things from happening in the future with our hobby, and maybe kind of clean it up a little bit or tighten it up a little bit. Rich Egan is clearly a different kind of collector than we've seen previously, and you'll see this in his letters to Buck Barker. In fact, he wants to start a publication, a guide, but he doesn't exactly know how to do that, and he's enlisting the help of others. Now, I know that he didn't actually participate in the 1967 American Card Catalog, but this catalog in the future, it's really going to be a catalyst for Rich Egan to start his own publication, and he wants to completely revamp the cataloging system and the prefixes, which he says are really confusing. And actually, that's true. A lot of people say that these prefixes are really confusing, although we do still use them today for our vintage cards. And the prefix system was kind of like discontinued after Jefferson Burdick passed away. I guess he was the final word on the subject, and he was the editor in chief, if you will. So there wasn't a whole lot of say that any of these guys could really do to move Jefferson Burdick away from the prefix system. But we know why there is one, because the way that he had put his collection together at the Met, and it's actually the Met that wants a prefix system to begin with. And again, we're getting a little bit off topic here, but Burdick actually did have a separate prefix system between 1936 and 1939. He abandoned this, and we see a different kind of prefix system that we know of today. I, I want to say like it was started in like 1945 or so, and by 1946, 47, all the way through to 1963 is what we have today. But Rich Egan clearly doesn't like this, and he has some thoughts of his own that you're going to read here, or you're going to listen to me read it here, and I think you're going to find this really interesting. So here we go. This is from the Chicago Tribune, December 20th, 1973. Really big trades in these cards by Donald Yabush. While the hot stove baseball scene is getting warmed up by off-season trading among the big league baseball clubs, there's another big league operation that's also in full swing, swapping among baseball trading card collectors. And if you think collecting baseball cards is for the small fry only, you've struck out. Richard Egan will thumb you out for that kind of thinking. Egan is a 32-year-old chemist who lives at 108 North Shadow Ave, Mundelein, and he freely admits collecting baseball cards has gotten to be a disease with him. I must have 30,000 cards, all carefully filed or cataloged. I trade, buy, or sell cards to improve my collection. I guess I have a collector's personality. We have to collect something. Egan said he's not a professional dealer. He buys, sells, or trades only so he can improve his growing collection. He refuses to put a monetary value on the collection, though he admits it's insured. Though his collection appears formidable, Egan figures that more than 100,000 different baseball card sets have been printed since 1886, when the Old Judge Cigarette Company issued cards featuring the players of the St. Louis Browns, New York Metropolitans, and others. Egan figures that his most valuable set of cards is the one issued in 1910 by the American Caramel Company. It is a set nearly 200 cards showing players of both leagues. He thinks he may have the only complete set of this issue. That's really important coming up, so keep that in the back of your mind. But Egan is not alone in this field in the Chicago area. There are Richard Bowe, Libertyville, a LaSalle Street stockbroker, Don Steinbach, Romeoville, a bank accountant, William Logeman Elmhurst, an airline pilot, and James Rowe Harvey, a tool and die manufacturing official. They compose the Chicagoland Collectors Association of baseball card collectors. They and some others who dabble in the hobby will stage a 1974 Baseball Nostalgia Expo next September in the Sheraton O'Hare Motor Hotel, Rosemont. I think that's actually where they have the national, but I could be wrong. When baseball card collectors get together, there arise tales about the baseball card, the fabled Honus Wagner card, of which there are only 12 known to exist and have sold for $1,000 or more at auction. The cards were published in 1910 as a selling incentive for the tobacco company, but the great Pittsburgh Pirates shortstop was aghast that his name was tied to tobacco. Besides, he wasn't consulted or even paid for the use of his name and pictures, so he threatened suit. The printing was stopped short, so some did go out to the general circulation. Most cards, Egan explained, are valued from a quarter up to a couple of dollars, depending on the rarity and age. Cards have been issued with products ranging from smoking tobacco, including one bearing the brand name of Thai Cobb, chewing tobacco, breakfast cereals, candy, and the new popular commodity bubblegum. About 60 years ago, the Cracker Jack Company offered a set of 176 cards for only a dime. Today, one of those cards commands as much as a higher price, wrote Charles Buck Barker in the association convention program earlier this year. Bubblegum trading cards were enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, when the entire collection of 1971 Topps baseball cards were put on display there. About 250 million of the pasteboards are printed annually. That's a lot of cards, but there are millions of kids who collect them each year, along with an estimated 50,000 adults like Egan and friends who work hard keeping up with the hobby. So before I get on to these letters, there's some really interesting things about that article. First, they said that there's only 12 1910 T206s or 1909 T206 Honus Wagner cards, and now we know of about 56, 57 and a half. There is actually one card that is cut in half. So that right there is kind of interesting. And in Burdick's day, I think there were only about 5 known copies or 5 known examples of that particular card, and all of those were in the hands of our hobby pioneers. The other thing that caught my eye was the price tag. $1,000 for a T206 Honus Wagner in 1973 is actually the 2024 equivalent of about $6,000 and change, and that's quite expensive actually in 1973. So not everybody had that kind of money, and I think a lot of cases you could actually purchase a T206 Wagner for about $500. And actually that did happen on like at least 2 occasions, but I'll get into that in another video or so. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So let's get on to the letters. This is from March 1st, 1966. Dear Buck, thanks for the very kind words on the booklet. There are a number of typing errors in the lists and article. My typing is just terrible. Thanks also for the E93, which I need. I defend the catalog for the number of reasons. Most importantly, I think the people like Shepard are just malcontents. The book's sales are not living up to my expectations, and I think I'm really going to get stung. This type of printing is very expensive, and so far I'm $70 in the hole. Hoped to sell 100 copies and break even, but only 40 have sold so far. I hope to do another using multilith for the pages and no printing to keep the costs down, but not before this summer. This one will have the sets. T204, T201, and T205. I will enlist your help. I've enclosed my new want list for the tobacco sets. Maybe we can work out a trade. I have duplicates in T204, T207, T12, T13, and a single duplicate in T11. If you'd send your wants in these sets, I'd appreciate it. Sincerely, Richard S. Egan. This is from August 26, 1966. Dear Mr. Barker, I have been contemplating a major project for the past 2 years, and I wonder if I could ask your opinion. I personally feel that the chances of another edition of the American Card Catalog being printed are small now that Mr. Burdick has passed away. It's been 6, going on 7 years since the last edition was set up, and I don't think Charles Bray has the interest to do another. I also feel that the majority of today's collectors have different interests than those exemplified in the present edition. The vast majority of today's collectors, myself and I believe you, are primarily interested in sports cards. There are hundreds of sports card collectors, and they show great interest in their hobby, as shown by the tremendous acceptance of the T206 booklet and articles I wrote for the Sports Trader. I'm sure no one has to tell you how many collectors there are who are active at this time. With these two facts in mind, I am contemplating the following project. I would like to attempt to get together a sports card catalog. I see the catalog in this light. To simply list all the various sports sets in a form similar to the present catalog would be no great improvement. This listing would be more up to date. I don't feel that this is sufficient because to go to the trouble of doing the work. I would also like to picture a sample card front and reverse from each set. A profusely illustrated catalog would be a great help and be welcomed by all collectors. Furthermore, I would like to work up checklists for every set possible and present them in a separate section. About 50% of the sets known today have been checklisted in partial or complete form in one hobby paper or another over the last 20 years. The checklisting would involve collating all this information and starting lists for those sets which have been neglected. There are two main stumbling blocks which must be overcome. The first is time. An attempt like this will be very time consuming. Lists will have to be made up, sent out for confirmation, checked for accuracy, and the like. No single collector has a sample from every sport set, and no one can supply checklists for every set ever printed. Collectors will have to be contacted about cards in their specialty and samples procured that can be photographed and reproduced in the catalog. If I can get the goodwill and help of enough collectors like yourself, I am willing to spend the vast amount of time to edit such a work. The second problem is finance. Printing costs are high, and the more halftone picture work that is used, the more expensive the project becomes. I have, in the T206 booklet, seen these costs for myself. However, using the multigraph process rather than offset printing combined with an unbound or cheaply bound 8.5 by 11-inch page will keep the cost within reasonable bounds. I'm willing to use my personal capital to finance the project. This should give you an idea of what I want to do and what I'm willing to do myself. Obviously, I cannot do everything. I will need help from other sport card collectors like yourself. One thing I will need is your advice. What cards should be placed in such a catalog? I collect only baseball cards that are printed on paper or cardboard that are smaller than 4 by 6. Therefore, I can work only on such cards. Should football and other sports cards be included? What about exhibit cards and team issues? Should sport postcards be included? Assuming that some sort of agreement can be reached on the content of the catalog, would you be willing to help in its preparation? Will you take the time to help prepare some checklists and check others? Will you be willing to lend your cards to me so I can photograph them? I will, if entrusted with cards, see that they are cared for and returned promptly. I will use registered mail and pay the postage both ways. Please give this further proposition some thought. Let me hear from you in the near future, pro or con, hoping that we can collaborate in the future. Sincerely, Richard S. Egan. This is from September 21, 1966. Thanks for the rapid reply to my letter. I know you are busy. Who isn't? I have a family myself and 2 jobs, so I know what busy means. You are right. My idea really wasn't anything original. I sent identical letters to Curtis, Schraff, Wise, Kentworthy, Nagy, Gelman, McLean, Hendricks, and said the same thing to Carter over the phone. All but Kentworthy have replied. That's an amazing list of hobby pioneers, and I'm probably going to get to a few of those guys. A lot of those guys are actually they're not talked about today, and they're really rather obscure. So it gives me another chance to bring out the obscurity in hobby history here and pioneers. Anyway, let's continue. Gelman tells me that the catalog has been begun. He called me a few days later and gave me the dope. He has offered to be as much help as he can and tells me he will work closely with me so that my set listings will be the same as those in the new catalog. I have in turn offered my services to him. We are presently swapping letters and notes. I'm really glad he's doing the catalog, as that will spare me that much work. A sport catalog is out. New idea is baseball card handbook to the American card catalog, which will be planned along the lines of the English World Tobacco Index and handbook to the index. I think there's an excellent chance of getting the 2 publications out close together if I can get all the help that was promised. And by the way, the World Tobacco Index was the idea of Edward Wharton Tiger, who is really known as the Jefferson Burdick of the British hobby. So that's pretty big. All of the above mentioned collectors have pledged their help as well as Solon. Before I found out about the catalog, Ed Curtis and I had decided to go on together, and I think we still will. His collection is filled with the samples, and I can find checklists. Lionel Cotter is coming over to my house Friday, and Bob Solon is due on Sunday. A trip to Michigan on business will include a visit to Nagy in Detroit, and I may even get out east to see Gelman, Wise, and Burdick's collection. I'm currently working on the E section of the catalog. The lists are coming in from Wise, Hendrick, and Carter, and then they go to McLean. I'll go see him in person someday soon. I'd like to send some to you after that for additions, if I may. I'm going to do the thing on the section at that time and do all the E-lists at one time. Makes the letters a little thick, but will save time in the long run. If possible, I'd like to come see you in person sometime in this winter. Think we can work out a visit. We'll only stay one day, so no problems will crop up that way. Please do spread the word. We'll need all the help I can get to really do something worthwhile. We'll send e-lists as soon as I have them collated and typed. No need to reply unless you want to beg off. Sincerely, Rich. This is from November 7th, 1966. Dear Buck, enclosed are the just completed e-listings. I still haven't heard from Dobbins, so I have not enclosed the E136 and E137 lists. I will give him another 2 weeks or so, and if no reply by then, I will have to make do without his listings. I believe all the listings are self-explanatory, and you should have no trouble using them. I only ask you to read the lists carefully and be on the lookout for mistakes, typographical, spelling, and the like. I know you were consulted in the past about some I know you were consulted in the past about some of these listings, and I ask you to please check your cards against these lists once again to ensure accuracy. I am always looking for items of information on these sets. Anything unusual or not obvious is of interest. I have been at these lists for about 3 months, so when I ask that they be preserved and returned, I'm sure you can see why. There are no great hurry up on these lists. Take all the time that you need to examine them closely. Any questions you have, I will be happy to answer. The only list that I would like to receive back promptly is the E90 et al. List. All the others were made in duplicate, so 3 collectors can use them at the same time. The E90 list is an original. If you could do this first and return it separately, so I could send it to the next collector that much faster and generally speed up the process. Your comments on the arrangement of the checklists are also solicited. Is the format chosen on these lists clear, or would an alternate form be better? Some listings are alphabetical, others are arranged by team. The alphabetical listing is preferred by myself, but I have followed the format used by other collectors who supplied me with virtually complete checklists. I've also just returned from New York, where I spoke with Woody Gelman and examined the Burdick collection. Time was a problem, and I was not able to make full use of the collection, but did get some valuable research done. Woody and I spent about 2 hours at his home discussing the catalog revisions. May I impose on you further and ask you advice on some problems that came up? We both would like to segregate the sport and non-sport listings. We would like to put the sport listings together in their own section on the catalog. This, however, presents some difficulties. The catalog system would be non-consecutive in the sports section. The only way to counter this would be to carry the sport cards in the general listings as notes only, referring to the sports section. What do you think of this? There are instances where changing the catalog numbers of some sections would be both logical and advantageous. What do you think of changing the catalog listings of cards in the E section? The listings that you will go through will show you what I mean. Why are E92, E101, E102, and E105 given separate listings when the sets are all made up of the same cards with only reverse differences? The reverses in T206 are all grouped together. Why not here? I also object to the division of standard size cards, while all issuers are grouped together, and other sizes where the issuers are grouped by issuer, either total listing by issuer or total listing by content would be more logical. I realize that the E section has been closed, and to change listing 30 years after the fact will be met with mixed emotion and wonder what you think. The problem will be encountered with every section, so I'd like to get the consequences of opinion before I leap off. While in New York, I saw Bruce Yecko. That's a name from the past, one of the first true card dealers in the country. Anyway, and found a few old catalog misses. I have enclosed 3 samples for you to see. One, a Wiener issue, Gus Trandos. The card is a non, but you can see the imperfection the hot dog make on the back of the cards look like a 1954 Hunter's Wiener card, and you can even detect the red border that was cut from the card. There are 10 different known. Dating the issue is not so simple. One card is Michael Blyska, another Don Larson, both of whom played with Baltimore only in 1954. The set also contains Gus Trandos and Willie Miranda, who didn't start with Baltimore until 1955. Odd thing is that the trade that sent Trandos and Miranda to Baltimore from the Yankees was the same one that sent Blyska and Larson to the Yankees from Baltimore. So all the players involved in that trade are in this one set. This seems to preclude the necessity of two sets, one set issued in 1954 and a second set in 1955. All the cards are exactly the same, so telling which card goes in which year is going to be impossible without using the records. And in cases like Villette, who played with Baltimore both years, totally impossible. Number 2, a milk issue. Ron Fairley is on a Derigold Farms card. You can see that the card has one trimmed side, so probably was on a carton flap or something like that. There are a total of 4 different cards known, all have the solid red background. Cards known are numbered 17, 18, 21, and 24. So the issue could be 24 or more different. The numbers could also be uniform numbers, as in the Union Oil Johnson Cookies cards, but can't check on minor league numbers. Issue easy to date as 1960, Bob Solon says may be like High House winners, but can't say as I never saw one of these. Number 3, a strip card. A card of an American League player. The player is really Atkins of Baltimore, as uses the T206 picture. There are a total of 6 known, and all of the same picture is in the T206 and are completely, I don't know what that actually says. Can be traces of a darker border along the edge of the card. This may be because these were strips, or this may be the outline of a T206 edge used when T206 was set up. Take your choice. And I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about there. There's a lot of things here in that I can't read. So I'm really sorry about that, guys. Please look the cards over and return them so I can send them to Yucko. He wouldn't see me the Wagner card at any price for some reason. Guess I've covered all the points I wanted to at this time. I've enclosed postage and an envelope to return the listings when you are through with them. I know this is a real big order. I typed the listings and I know how much time they took, but I really do appreciate any consideration you are able to give me. Thanks again. Sincerely, Richard S. Egan. So this kind of shows you just how difficult it was to put a catalog like this together. It was his own catalog, and the publication that he's referring to, there was only 12 issues, and it only lasted for about a year, sporadically, in fact. So I don't think that a whole lot of people actually read this stuff. But something further that I was thinking about, something larger, was the fact that you have a lot of information in these catalogs and these publications that are just spread all over the place, and it's kind of like Swiss cheese for researchers and collectors who are trying to study the history of the hobby. It's not easy to try to find a lot of these older publications, or even I think maybe catalogs too that are spread all over the place. There's no central, I guess, authority or place that all of this stuff is in for researchers to go and say, I want to read this catalog, I want to read that publication. It's just all over the place and in bits and pieces. So it makes it really difficult for guys like me to try to trace our hobby history. Um, I love doing that, by the way. I really do. I think it's for me it's better than collecting cards. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do love to collect cards, as you can see in the back, but at some point in time, personally, I found this to be a little bit more of a challenge, and I really wanted to find out more about a hobby history and history of the United States as well. Anybody can track down a sports card. It may take some time, but it's not as difficult for the most part as trying to track down a defunct hobby publication. You're only really getting bits and pieces, by the way. You're not getting the entire picture. So I really like to try to complete this picture for future generations. And it's, again, one of the reasons why I started to collect vintage sports cards was because I didn't know who a lot of these players were. I didn't know a lot about the teams that they were on, like the Washington Senators or St. Louis Browns or even Brooklyn Dodgers. For me, history is one of the reasons why I have started this channel and why I collect vintage. And that actually goes back for decades. In fact, some of my earliest memories were of going to visit my aunt and uncle and seeing all their antiques, and just I had so many questions, about some of the stuff that they had: antique cars, antique prints, and paintings, and all this other really interesting old stuff. So I always had questions about the stuff, and then all of a sudden, as I said to you guys before, I had a really bad education, and so my teacher took us on a trip to the card store to learn about math and problem solving skills. And that's where I saw a bunch of T206s, T205s, and so I had a lot of questions about these things, and that kind of like set me towards being a writer and just doing a lot of research into the hobby. And the 1994 baseball players strike happened, and that was the last nail in the coffin for my modern collection. So uh, this I thought was also interesting too, because as we see where Rich Egan is actually contemplating a new version of the American card catalog that is better than the one prior, 1960. And the 1967 comes out, and I don't think he's all that thrilled about this thing. I'm not really thrilled about it either. I mean, it is very extensive. It still has its issues, but it is actually quite good, in fact. But I still have my issues with it. It's not quite modern guide to sports cards, and there's no checklists of these cards individually. And we start seeing them in this particular catalog here, but it's far and few between. And so in 1969, Rich Egan he prints the catalog for the early candy and gum cards. That's it. And I don't know how well that's done. I've seen a few examples. One sold for I think 500, or is selling for $500, which is quite expensive. And as you can see here, it is very plain Jane. There's not a whole lot to it. So the expense really is kind of kept a lot of people from trying to purchase these particular guides, these catalogs that Rich Egan issued, and I'm not even sure how many actually exist now. And so I thought this was really interesting. This particular guide that he came up with in 1969, he wanted to revamp a lot of what was seen in the 1967. Clearly, he wanted to do this, and this actually didn't happen until the Sport Americana in 1979. So, yeah, he'd have to wait for a while. But the 1970s and the hobby is a really fascinating time. There's not a whole lot of catalogs out there in the 1970s, and I'm going to get to another catalog from 1977 in a future video. So guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think about what I've said here. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And if there's any information here that I have not included, please, by all means, uh, tell me in the comment section below. And I will talk to you guys in another video. Have a good one. Bye.